papered with was newspapers. So it was a lot of fun to anybody to come in and read the stories off of them old papers on the wall. Mama said when she was laying in bed after I'd been born, she spent her time reading the paper. But when the first thing we did when we got there, Mama had, they had been raising chickens and so on at home. She sold some hens, and she took the money from her hens and she bought wallpaper. They put new wallpaper on over that printed newspaper, and over the other room, it was across the open hallway, they had wallpaper they put on that. But then there, what was the dining room and the kitchen didn't even get sealed. They were just boarded up. But everybody wanted to come back home because at the meantime they'd lived there. And when I was going to high school, you never knew who was coming, who would be at home when you got home in the afternoon. One time, Mom, Daddy, and Mama, the little stove that they cooked on in the kitchen was just a little oblong iron stove that 4 eyes on it, and the pipes went up through the ceiling. We got home, they had bought a new stove, and it had a warming closet on it and a reservoir on the side on it to heat water. Well, that was good. We sure did enjoy that, to have that stove with that warm water and a good place to get behind it to have your bath in the morning. And then Daddy and...
You go ahead and talk to him. Keep going.
Well, my daddy started a milk route, and he went around to different people's houses and picked up their milk in cans and brought it to Corinth to the Kraft Cheese Company, and they processed it like that and made cheese out of it and sold it. So the country people was glad for him to come along with that milk truck, and they would have some money. That was during the Depression in the 30s, see. And so he did that and kept his milk route going. So he'd always buy a hoop of cheese and bring it home, those round hoops. So they'd have that, and they'd scoot it under a bed. And in the morning when Mama was going to fix lunches for the children, they'd bring that hoop of cheese out and cut slices to put in the biscuits so we could carry with us to school. But all the kinfolks wanted to come there to live. One of the cousins came back and lived with us in the winter time to go to school at Alcorn Agricultural High School. And old ladies that was our kinfolks and so on, they would come to spend the night, and I always slept with the old woman when they came. Well, then we was going to have another baby in our family in 1927. So this lady, there was named Mary Green Butler. She was a midwife. She came to stay with us until the brother was born. We didn't know he'd be a brother or a girl or sister. So when he came, Aunt Mary Green was there. She was the midwife, and we all wanted to name the baby for the two grandpas, James Dillingham, Mama's daddy, and Henry Briggs, Daddy's daddy. So he was named James Henry, but he was to be called Jaybird. And the reason why, Jaybird Dillingham, his grandpa, when they came into Alcorn County, it was Old Tishomingo County then, Corinth was not even a city. It had not been made a city. It didn't have a courthouse. It had buildings that they could have court in and so on here, like Justice of Peace and so on. But anyway, he got too much liquor, and he came to town. They had an old bull out there, and that old bull was named Jaybird. So they dared him to ride up the courthouse steps on Old Bull, and he did. Well, Mama always told us that story, that because the bull was named Jaybird, that's what Grandpa was called. But we found out later that he rode up those steps naked as a jaybird, and that's why it got called Jaybird.
As folks do.
As folks do.
Yeah, right here, this very area, that's where the courthouse was. And he rode it up there naked as a jaybird. And so my brother he was Jaybird as long as he lived, and he just loved that story. He'd tell it to everybody. You want me to stop?
No, never.
He's just making sure you're still in the picture.
Everything is fine.
Well, okay. But the Briggses, they always had company. But Uncle George, the second son, great-grandpas. He married 3 times. He married the second time. The first time he got a divorce from that wife, and the second wife he had several children from her. But the third wife, they didn't get to live together but about 5 years, and she died. They had sold all their property in Alcorn County, his 2 daughters and their husbands and Uncle George Briggs, and they'd sold their property and went to Oklahoma to buy property because they were finding oil on that property. Well, one of them did find oil on her property, but the other one didn't find it on his, and Uncle George bought it. I thought it was 400 acres of land, I don't know. But anyway, some of the families still got that land out there at El Dorado, Oklahoma. And he went out there and he put his money in that land. But he came back here. He went back to his daughter-in-law's house. His daughter-in-law had a small house. Her 2 daughters she had by her first husband had married. Her 2 sons was living with her, and they began to get married, and she needed the room. So Uncle George had to find another place to live. He came to our house. I went home from school one evening. Uncle George was living with us. Mama and Daddy had fixed him a room. He had 10 quilts, and an iron bed, and a feather bed, and a pillow, and a trunk, and he moved that with him wherever he went. He moved it to our house. And he was so happy to be there. He would come in there and sit in front of the fireplace in the rocking chair in the middle of the floor. Mama'd be on the one side churning, and this big old fireplace that the great-granddaddy had built the bricks there on the farm. And it was a big old fireplace that kept the house good and warm. And it was sealed with all that oak log, them white oak logs and them wide planks, and chinked and daubed in them in between the logs too. And I played paper dolls under there, so I knew about those logs. You could get up under there where your fireplace was. It would be warm on the ground, and I'd get up there with my paper dolls and play with them in the winter time. But we had our school we had to walk to school. At first we didn't have school buses. The first year I had to walk. And Mama and Daddy wondered somebody would have to walk with me to school and then have to meet me when school was out in the afternoon. Well, that was a hard thing to happen, but then the next year we had a cousin that lived close by, and he carried a school wagon. And he fixed a wagon up looked like a Wild West wagon with a canvas top over it with a bows going across the top, and he drove his mules and he came to pick up the school children. Well, he was my cousin, and his mama would call Mama on the phone and tell Mama to send me up the hill. Mark had left with a wagon, and when I could get to the top of the hill, Mark would be up there to pick me up, and he did. So if it was too cold, he'd carry me back to his mama's house and let me stay with her while he went on and to pick up other children and come back. And of course that was cousins and somebody looking out after me. And our mama's family all had, in 1920, Daddy was building a house near us for a tenant to live in, so there'd be somebody to help Mama with her children. And so Grandpa was there helping him saw. They didn't have electricity, had to saw with a handsaw. He was standing between the sills of that porch sawing with a handsaw, and Mama and I walked out there, and that's the last time I saw my grandpa. I was 3.5 years old, and he left home to go he had planted corn, and the corn needed to be side dressed, and he had to come to town to get fertilized. Coming around the long road, it would be 15 miles a long road, but he left home in the middle of the night and drove to town and got over here on Linden Street where it crossed the railroad there. Coming down there, and the roads was graveled, and there was willow trees growing along each side of the railroad. He'd coming down that hillside, and he drove his mules over that railroad, and then the train killed him and his mules. That was in 1920. Well, that was a heartbreaking thing for our family. Well, the next year in 1921, Mama's family came down with an epidemic of typhoid fever. We all went out there, and they carried the kids and fixed us a pallet out on the cotton seeds, and with quilts on it for us to sleep out there. We couldn't go in the house because typhoid fever was catching. Well, Uncle Jim had a son and 2 daughters, and he with the typhoid fever, and he died. And so the others, they got well, and we came home. Well, then come on to September. That was in June. September, they still had the germ in the family. Mama's other brother came down with a typhoid fever, but he didn't die. He got well with it. Then in December, my daddy came down with it. They still had the germ, and so he came down with a typhoid fever in December, and they thought he was going to die, but he didn't. He made it through. Dr. Hughes, good old Dr. Hughes, came in the buggy. He rode a mule. He came there, or he rode a horse. He came to see my daddy sometimes twice a day and pulled him through. And I remember Daddy couldn't eat cornbread or anything like that because his typhoid fever would cook you on the insides, and his intestines would hang in on his intestines. So he had to eat something soft. He could drink sweet milk, and they put cornflakes in the sweet milk, and he could eat that. And of course, we'd always look at those cornflakes, when there'd be a little flakes. Well, on Daddy's foot, he'd be a little scale sticking up on his foot. His peeling off. Them scales coming off of him, just like typhoid fever, it cooked him inside and out. But he got well, and he lived till 1975, so he had a good long life. But he and Mama, they had Jaybird there, and we all had a good place to live. And Daddy Daddy was elected supervisor of Alcorn County. He was going to move to the middle of the 1st District, which would be out at West Corinth, and he did. Well, he couldn't have had property out there he could buy, but he couldn't buy the property till he could sell his home place out there. Well, 2 years he sold his home place, so he brought his money back there. But the man, Daddy had been farming while he was being supervisor. He was still farming that land and growing cotton as tall as your head. You could stand up in it and be hid that cotton. That land hadn't been worked in years. That man didn't want to give up that land. He was getting too much interest off it. He couldn't invest his money, and he was, and anyway, he was Mr. Haynes, so that Daddy said that was all right. So he had another friend that lived a little closer to town. He told him about another piece of property down there by the railroad. So they went and Daddy bought that. He built a house out there on the hill on a breastwork that he scooted the top of it off with a county scooted the top of it off with their road machinery, and he built his house there in 1946, and he and Mama moved there. And then in 1948, Mama had cancer, breast cancer. She had surgery in Memphis in 47, and she died in 1948. Well, in 1949, Daddy remarried Miss Gertrude Lindsay. She hadn't ever been married before, and she was 49 years old, so that was a good deal. She made him a wonderful wife, and she just loved him with all of her heart. That's the same thing for sure and certain. She said, she called him Jeff. Jeff could do anything he wanted to if he had a mind to, but fly an airplane. And if he wanted to bad enough, he could learn that. But anyway, she lived, after Daddy died in 75, she lived on there till 87, and she died. But in the meantime, he had sawed the lumber on that hillside. He had first bought a boiler that you would get power from putting water in that boiler, and run his sawmill back and forth, and had an old man that would work at the sawmill, and that would give them all something to do. And he'd cut the pine timber. He'd farm in the summer, and in the off seasons he would saw up the pine timber, and they'd sell that. So he bought a skid motor, and then where he could move it around wherever he wanted to. He didn't have to carry the boiler with him. But he had a man that came to our house in 1924, because my sister had been born then, and I know he was already living with us then. He had worked at a gin at Kossuth and got one of his arms, his right arm, cut off just below his elbow. So he was named Mr. Frank Rose. And he was the same age of Daddy was about 2 months older than him in the summertime, but they grew up the same age. And he just thought the world of our family. And he raised my brothers and my sister and me there. When Mom and Daddy didn't have money for Santa Claus to come to see us, he'd buy us something for Santa Claus to bring us. He bought us doll beds and all kind of toys like that. And he lived on with us till Daddy got the skid motor. He didn't have a place, nothing to do then. He could fire the boiler to make steam. So he went to Louisiana to live with a friend down there that had a mill down, a planing mill down there, and he would fire the boiler for him. But he lived down there till he died. But he lived with us all those years, even there before I married and after I married and so on. Uncle George living with us, and Aunt Ann and Uncle George, Mama's sister and her husband lived over there by the church. So he died in 1929. So Daddy and one of the nephews tore that old house down, brought it over there and put it up in the orchard. And Aunt Ann and her 2 little children, a little 10-year-old girl and a 8-year-old boy, moved in that house, and they became a part of our family. They had their own house, but if it was too cold or too bad, or stormy, they always stayed at our house. They had a special bed that they'd sleep in. Of course, the girl would sleep with me, and they grew up as our family too. Then Uncle Josh Dillingham, who was Mama's brother, never married, but Aunt Ida Dillingham that had married Sanford Burgess, she and her husband separated, and she came back to live with her mother and her brother. Well, her mother died, but she kept on living with the brother, and they lived at Old Home, and so that's who Mom and Daddy bought Old Home from when we moved back to the Old Home. Well, they moved to West Corinth out here. The house was on the school ground, where now the school ground there where the teachers could reach it, park out there, that was their yard, and the house was there, had a little grocery store, and he had the grocery store, and those 2 boys. And West Corinth was, the school went to the 11th through the 11th grade, and so children come there and go to school, and they'd just like 1 year be ready to graduate from high school, and then they'd get on to Kossuth for that. But Uncle and Josh and Aunt Ida would come. When we first moved to Old Home, every Sunday morning, Aunt Ida and Uncle Josh and the 2 boys would come to our house on Sunday morning and visit on Sunday. And that was all right. We loved them. And so they felt like coming back home. I know when my sister came Easter, she told Uncle Josh to bring her, when he came back next Sunday, to bring her an Easter bonnet. So he did. He brought her an Easter bonnet from Rubel's department store. So we lived on there, and Daddy sold the old house, and he sold it to Mr. Clyde Felker. No, he sold it to Mr. Gray, and Mr. Gray sold it to Mr. Clyde Felker. But in 1957, a tornado came through, and it flattened our Shiloh Baptist Church over there. I mean, it made it flat as the ground. It crossed that valley and went over that next hill and tore up that old log house. He left one room, one wall standing in that house, and Mr. and Miss Felker lived there, and they backed up against that wall, and they stood there, and the storm didn't kill them.
Wow.
So that was that. You want me to hush?
No.
No.
Okay, I'm through with the Briggses. You want me to start on somebody else?
Miss Lila, tell Mike what we talked about coming here today.
Huh?
Tell Mike what we talked about living in Corinth. About what we think about living in Corinth, what you said.
Oh,
Tell him.
Come on.
of all the places in the United States or the world, this is the best place, the whole place, to be living right now.
Why?
We have less crime. We have good jobs. Our people live here, they're happy together. It is the garden spot of the world.
It is a beautiful place.
It is.
It has the friendliest people I've ever met.
Well, it is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I grew up with all these old people.
Mm-hmm.
and I love for them to come. And that's why I like genealogy. When I found out that I could order a film from Utah, and I got the 1880 census, well, I put it on a film reader at the bank. I worked at the bank then, and I could put it on there. I would go early in the morning and run it off about 30 minutes and find a little bit more. Or at noon, I had 45 minutes, and I'd spend my time on it that. Then I'd stay later in the afternoon and put time. And on Wednesday, we was off, and I'd stay all evening on Wednesday and look at that film. And we brought the film reader down here. And that's when I first got the film reader, and it had the 1880 census on it. Well, we ordered other censuses, and I ordered the one on Giles County, Tennessee, and the one on Lincoln County, Tennessee, and Monroe County, Mississippi, where my family had all come from. But my my Dillinghams had come down. I think the Dillinghams crossed over. What time you gotta go?
I'm fine. I was just checking my
Checking
watch.
time.
Keep talking. This is perfect.
I'm having a good time.
Excellent.
We
Me
are too.
Well, the Dillinghams crossed over at the Cumberland Gap out of Virginia, where they came from out in there. They crossed over the Cumberland Gap. They crossed the corner of Kentucky, came on down through Tennessee, and they went down the Cumberland River, down to Nashville, on down the Cumberland River to Monroe County, Mississippi, and they got down there in 1837.
Oh.
In 1837, and it stopped at Cotton Gin Port. That's in Monroe County. Cotton Gin Port is at Hamilton's close by. There were several of them. They had stopped and stayed 2 years in Johnson County. I believe it was Jackson County, Tennessee. And John Dillingham was the father of this group, and they caught a heifer, called it taking up a heifer, a wild calf or a stray calf, and it had to be registered with the courthouse there, and he had to keep it 2 years, and if nobody claimed it, he could keep it. So they lived there 2 years, we know that, because of that record we have. But they came on down, and one boy was named James and one was named Joshua, as they came on down to Monroe County and lived at Cotton Gin Port. And so they hadn't been farmers. They'd been frontiers people. As land would open up, they'd get a little further over and over. And they came on down there. They built a racetrack. They had a big racetrack, and they did a lot of racing. They had races that they raced for as much as $1,000 a piece on them races, and so they were crazy to do it, but they did it. And we've got that written down. Dr. Evans, that lived in Monroe County, he wrote the Mother Monroe about the book, and that's written up in there. But James Dillingham's oldest son was named Henry. So Henry had land. James was appointed to be the overseer of lowlands down in that area. It was swamplands or lowlands or something like that, but he was appointed that, and people wanted to buy them, they could buy it through him. So his son Henry had the property, and they had a racetrack on it. Well, my grandpa was Joshua, and they both of these boys had married women named Mary in Tennessee. My grandpa's wife, they called her Polly, and the other one kept calling her Mary, but they kept having the big families, so they lived close together on the same land. But whiskey was just a local thing to have, whatever they got to. They had, it wasn't beer, it was just rye whiskey. So they thought it was bad luck for an old hen to crow. So this morning in 1850, Grandpa Joshua, old hen crowed, and he went out there and he shot the old hen and killed her because it was bad luck for a hen to crow. Okay, he took off and went down to the road. Wasn't no road, and he went to a saloon where two drunk men was fighting. So he was going to separate the two drunk men, and he got killed. I don't know what happened to them, but that caused the family to get disheartened with living there, but they kept living there until about 1853. It's 1850 when the census was taken there, and they were living there in Monroe County. So they went, their one daughter was married. She was Adeline. She had married a Parchman. John, the oldest son, had married a Parchman. So of course, everybody had their big families. But then they had a sister named Jane, and she had married a Neely. Well, in the 50th census, Jane had already gone, but she had left Mr. Neely, and she had gone back home to the Dillinghams. And Mr. Neely was living with his family just across the line, is in the same neighborhood. But they all loaded up on their wagons, because that's the only way they had to travel, was they had those horses to pull in wagons. And they crossed the Mississippi River. They carried all their families, their wives and the husbands, or the husbands carried the wives with them. John carried his wife, Martha Parchman Dillingham, and Adeline Dillingham carried her husband, Christopher Clay Parchman, with her, and away they went across that river. They had to go on a ferry, I guess, when they got there. That was the only way you could cross the river. But they stayed over there 2 years. The reason we know they stayed there 2 years, the oldest son, John, he was in charge of all the property that they had when they left Monroe County down there. The money that they got for the property, he was in charge of it. He invested it in land when he got back over here in Alcorn County out there in Pine Mountain. You want me to go?
Keep going.
He invested it in land out there at Pine Mountain. From up for Pine Mountain, across the highway, Pt2 out there where Goose Pond Creek crosses under Pt2 and goes up to Chapman's up there, up that hillside. Well, there wasn't nothing but pine trees. All you could do was just cut them pine trees and so on. So that's what my granddaddy did for a living, was work at a sawmill where they'd cut pine trees. And so they come back there and they lived at that place. And they got back up there, and then they started scouting down around throughout the country. But the Dillinghams, Mike Dillingham and James Dillingham married sisters. They married Leatherwoods. They was in the Civil War. Both of them in the Civil War. They registered out at Kossuth, and I've got it over here for you to see. And so they had moved back there, and they married sisters. One sister, Jane Lila Leatherwood, that married Mike Dillingham, died. She had one daughter, but the daughter went to live with my grandpa and my grandma, so she grew up as their daughter, and that had made them have an extra child. So they had 2 sons, and had 3 sons, and 4 daughters. They had their own 3, and Mary Lee made their extra one. The niece made an extra daughter. So they had a house full of children. But you know, they had to spin the thread on a spinning wheel. Of course, it's at my house that they brought back from South Carolina with them, and it's there at my house now. And I don't know who's going to get it when I pass on, so it'll get to move soon. But I don't want it to go to no museum. But anyway, John Dillingham had 2 daughters that was born in Arkansas. So we know they stayed over that long. But they came back over here. And my granddaddy had 2 sisters that died while they lived over there. They were in the area that they grew cotton. My grandpa told my mama and them that it was the Delta land over there. And they got mosquitoes ate you up. Mm-hmm. So anyway, they died from malaria over there, and that's why they left and come back to the hill country. So,
is there anything you would like people to know about your life or about living in Corinth that you haven't told us today?
No, I've told.
You told everything. And who was your husband?
My husband was Norbin Mitchell Voyles. Mm-hmm. His mother and daddy separated when he was a child, so he didn't live with his Voyles parents. His mother remarried, And when he got old enough to leave his mother and his stepdaddy, he went to his granddaddy's house, who was a girlie. Well, granddaddy girlie, he was getting big enough to get out on his own. So he left Grandpa Gurley and went out on his own and started farming. You know, people would hire young boys to farm and help them out. They would work. He'd work at cotton gins and things like that. He was driving a school bus. So he picked me up to carry me to school on that school bus. And so I was the first one to go off, the last one to get on in the morning, the last one to get off. So he became my boyfriend. He was my boyfriend for 3 years. And we married after I got out of high school. And we was married 50-something years.
That's wonderful.
54. And we had one daughter, she's June, and she married Richard Leonard, the love of her life. And she has 3 children and 3 grandchildren. Her husband died when they'd been married 31 years. She keeps working. She worked in taxes last year. She'll go back and work in taxes when tax time comes again.
Miss Lila, thank you so much for this. Thank you for coming down here today.
Well, I've got a whole bunch. You want to stay all afternoon?
I think you've done a remarkable job.
You
Thank
did
you.
a good job.
Thank you very much for spending the time with me. I really appreciate it.
Well, look at these pictures. Don't leave here without that.
I won't leave here without a thing.